Part 1, the massive space station hung in the darkness like a glowing jewel. Nexus Prime Station was the heart of the Galactic Federation, where dozens of alien species came to trade, negotiate, and make deals that shaped the galaxy. Commander Jake Harrison stood at the observation deck, watching ships from 100 different worlds dock at the station's countless ports. Jake wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic security force. He was 35 years old, with short brown hair and careful eyes that missed nothing. Behind him, his team prepared for another day of protecting Earth's ambassadors. Lisa Monroe sat at her computer station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she monitored communication channels. Alex Carter checked his weapon for the third time that morning, his military training showing in every movement. Earth had been part of the Galactic Federation for only 2 years. Most humans back home were excited about joining the galaxy's biggest club. They thought it meant respect, friendship, and amazing new technology. Jake knew better. He had spent those 2 years listening to alien delegates whisper about humans when they thought no one was paying attention. The Zephyrians were 7 feet tall with scales that changed color when they were angry or excited. They came from a desert world where only the strongest survived. Their military was famous across the galaxy for never losing a war. General Vextar was their chief representative, a massive creature with golden scales and eyes like burning coals. He made no secret of what he thought about humans. The Kythera were different but equally dangerous. They looked like giant insects with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in 12 different spectrums of light. What made them truly frightening was their hive mind. Every Kythera was connected to every other Kythera through mental links that humans barely understood. Hive mind Zaraketh spoke for billions of her kind, and her voice always sounded like several people talking at once. Jake's earpiece crackled to life. Lisa's voice came through clearly. Commander, Ambassador Price is heading to Conference Room 7. The trade negotiations start in 30 minutes. Jake nodded and started walking. His team fell into formation around him without being told. They had done this dance hundreds of times. Alex took point scanning for threats. Lisa stayed close to Jake, her portable computer ready to handle any technical problems. They moved through the station's gleaming corridors like a well-oiled machine. Nexus Prime Station was beautiful in an alien way. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft light. Holographic art from dozens of worlds decorated the halls. Fountains filled with liquid that wasn't quite water created soothing sounds. But Jake never forgot that beauty could hide danger. They reached Conference Room 7 just as Ambassador Helen Price arrived from the other direction. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who had spent her whole career dealing with difficult people. Today she would need every bit of that experience. The conference room was enormous, with a circular table that could seat 50 beings. Delegates from 12 different species were already there, talking in their various languages. The universal translator built into Jake's earpiece turned their words into English, but it couldn't translate their attitudes. General Vextar dominated one side of the table, his golden scales bright with confidence. Near him sat 3 other Zephyrian officers, all wearing armor that could probably stop a tank shell. On the opposite side, Hive Mind Zaraketh's 4 arms moved in complex patterns as she spoke silently to other Kythera through their mental link. Ambassador Price took her seat at the table. Jake and his team positioned themselves along the wall, close enough to react to any threat but far enough away to avoid interfering with diplomacy. The negotiations were about trading rights in 3-star systems near Earth's territory. It should have been routine. General Vextar spoke first, his voice like gravel grinding together. Before we discuss trade routes, I must ask a question that troubles many of us. Why should we trust military protection to a species that has never fought a real war? The room went quiet. Jake felt his jaw tighten but kept his face neutral. Ambassador Price smiled politely. Earth has a long history of military conflict, General. Our species has been fighting wars for thousands of years. Fighting each other, Hive Mind Zaraketh interrupted, her multiple voice creating an eerie harmony. Primitive conflicts on a single world. You have no experience with real warfare, no understanding of what threatens us in the dark between stars. A delegate from the Zerani species, crystalline beings from the core worlds, added his opinion. The humans did well enough in the admission trials. Their technology is adequate. General Vextar's scales flashed bright red, a sign of anger among his people. adequate for fighting pirates and smugglers. But what happens when something truly dangerous appears? When enemies come who can destroy entire worlds? Will Earth's warriors hide behind their simple kinetic weapons and hope for the best? Jake wanted to speak up, to defend his species and his fellow soldiers, but his job was to protect the ambassador, not to argue with alien generals. He watched Alex's hand move closer to his weapon and gave him a slight shake of the head. Ambassador Price kept her diplomatic smile in place. Perhaps this is a discussion best left for another time. We're here to talk about trade routes, not military capabilities. Military capability determines trade rights, General Vexitar said, standing up to his full impressive height. Who will protect merchant ships if humans cannot protect themselves? Your species is weak. You rely on numbers and crude weapons because you lack the strength for real combat. The insult hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Jake saw Alex's face go red and Lisa's fingers stopped moving over her computer. Around the table, other delegates watched to see how the humans would respond. General Vexitar wasn't finished. I propose a test. The Galactic War Games begin in 3 months on Titan's Edge. Let Earth send its best warriors. Let them prove they deserve to sit at this table. Hivemind Zaraketh's compound eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. An interesting suggestion. The War Games will show us what humans are truly capable of, or perhaps what they are not capable of. Jake felt his heart sink. The Galactic War Games were legendary throughout the Federation. They happened every 5 years, bringing together the best military forces from dozens of worlds. Species used them to prove their strength, settle disputes, and show off new weapons. No human had ever participated. Ambassador Price looked around the table, seeing the challenge in every alien face. Earth accepts, she said quietly. General Vexitar's scales brightened to gold again. Excellent. Try not to embarrass yourselves too badly. The galaxy will be watching. As the delegates filed out of the conference room, Jake's earpiece buzzed with an incoming message from Earth Command. The priority code made his blood run cold. Whatever was in that message, it was classified at the highest levels. Jake waited until they were alone before accessing the message. The words that appeared on his personal display made him forget all about alien insults and war games. Something was happening in the Outer Rim territories, something the aliens didn't know about yet, something that would change everything. Part 2 3 months passed faster than Jake Harrison had hoped. The journey to Titan's Edge took 2 weeks aboard Earth's newest military transport, the ESS Victory. Jake spent most of that time training with his team and trying not to think about how badly this could go wrong. Titan's Edge was a fortress world on the border between Federation space and the unknown regions. Ancient weapon platforms orbited the planet like deadly moons. The surface was covered with training facilities, weapon ranges, and arenas built by dozens of different species over hundreds of years. This was where the galaxy's warriors came to prove themselves. Jake's team consisted of 50 of Earth's best soldiers. Katie Bell was their sniper, a quiet woman from Texas who could hit a target from 3 miles away. Ryan Torres handled explosives with the delicate touch of an artist. Sam Parker was their medic, a man who had saved more lives than he could count during Earth's last major conflict. The opening ceremony took place in the Grand Arena, a massive structure that could hold 500,000 spectators. Beings from across the galaxy filled the seats, their various languages creating a buzz that the universal translators couldn't quite handle. Jake stood with his team on the arena floor, feeling very small among the other competitors. General Vexitar's team wore armor that looked like it belonged in a museum of future warfare. Each Zephyrian soldier stood 8 feet tall, their scaled skin protected by energy shields that shimmered like heat waves. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy that could melt through steel. The Cathara delegation moved as one unit, their hive mind coordination perfect and terrifying. They wore no armor because their natural shells could stop most weapons. Their forearms carried different tools and weapons, switching between them with mechanical precision. The Zerani team looked like living crystals, their bodies reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level, turning simple rocks into deadly weapons or protective barriers. Other species brought their own advantages, the Vorlak with their telekinetic powers, the Menthari with their ability to phase through solid matter, the Deltans with their precognitive abilities. Jake looked at his own team and tried to feel confident. His soldiers wore standard Earth military gear, ceramic and metal armor, kinetic weapons that fired metal projectiles, and communication devices that seemed primitive compared to the telepathic links other species enjoyed. They looked like ancient warriors brought forward in time to fight gods. The first phase was fleet combat simulation. Each species brought 5 ships to engage in mock battles above the planet. Jake commanded Earth's squadron from the bridge of the corvette ESS Defiant. His other ships were the frigates Courage, Honor, Destiny, and Freedom. The human ships used pack tactics that had worked well in Earth's solar system. They moved together, covering each other's weaknesses and concentrating their fire on single targets. For the first few minutes, it actually worked. Jake's squadron managed to destroy 2 Zerani vessels before the other teams adapted, but adaptation came quickly. The Zephyrian dreadnought flame of victory simply absorbed the kinetic rounds from human weapons, its energy shields growing stronger with each hit. The Kythera swarm ships moved in patterns no human mind could follow, appearing and disappearing through micro-jumps that confused human targeting systems. Within 30 minutes, Earth's entire squadron was marked as destroyed by the simulation computers. Jake watched his ship's status lights turn red one by one, feeling the weight of his species' expectations crushing down on him. The second phase was ground warfare on Titan's Edge's surface. Each team had to capture and hold 3 strategic positions while preventing other teams from doing the same. The terrain was deliberately hostile: radioactive deserts, acid rainforests, and mountain ranges with gravity wells that could crush unprotected beings. Jake's soldiers fought with everything they had. Katie Bell's sniper rifle cracked across the battlefield, taking down targets that other species' sensors couldn't even detect. Ryan Torres turned the landscape into a maze of explosions and traps. Sam Parker kept the team functioning, despite injuries that would have stopped most other species. But human advantages meant nothing against overwhelming technological superiority. Zephyrian soldiers walked through human gunfire like it was rain, their personal shields deflecting every shot. When human forces tried to flank them, Kythera scouts shared perfect information across their hive mind, making surprise attacks impossible. The Vorlak didn't even need to see human soldiers to kill them. Their telekinetic powers crushed human weapons from hundreds of yards away. The Manthari phased through solid cover, appearing behind human positions to strike without warning. The Deltans knew where human forces would move before the humans themselves decided. After 8 hours of brutal fighting, Earth's forces held exactly 0 strategic positions. Jake's team was exhausted, outgunned, and thoroughly beaten. Other species had barely worked up a sweat. The final phase was individual champion combat. Each species selected their best warrior for single combat in the arena. Jake wanted to fight himself, but regulations required each team's official champion to compete. Danny Cross was Earth's choice, a Marine who had won every hand-to-hand combat tournament on 3 different continents. He was fast, strong, and smart. Against human opponents, he was unbeatable. Against alien champions, he was just another primitive mammal. The Zephyrian champion was named Karthak, a veteran of 30 battles who had never been defeated. His golden scales were covered with ritual scars, and his energy weapons could cut through metal like paper. The Kythera sent hive warrior Zexanil, whose 4 arms moved independently while his compound eyes tracked multiple targets simultaneously. Danny fought with courage that made every human in the arena proud. He used every dirty trick, every advantage his training had given him. For a few moments, it looked like human determination might be enough. He actually managed to land several hits on Karthak, drawing first blood and earning grudging respect from the alien audience. But respect didn't stop Karthak's energy blade from cutting through Danny's armor like it wasn't there. Danny went down hard, his left arm nearly severed, his ribs broken, his face bloody. The medics rushed onto the arena floor while the alien crowd cheered for their champion. Jake watched his friend carried away on a stretcher and felt something break inside his chest. This wasn't just defeat. This was humiliation on a galactic scale. General Vextar's voice boomed across the arena as he addressed the crowd. Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge the established order. Earth's warriors are brave but weak. They fight with ancient weapons and primitive tactics. They have no place among true warriors. Hive Mind Zaraketh's multiple voice added her own judgment. Humanity should return to their small world and leave warfare to species who understand it. They are evolutionary mistakes unfit for the challenges that await us in the darkness between stars. Jake stood in the arena, surrounded by the laughter and contempt of a galaxy that had already written off his entire species. His earpiece buzzed with another priority message from Earth Command. The words that appeared on his display made his blood run cold. The threat in the outer rim was moving faster than anyone had predicted, and the aliens who had just humiliated humanity were about to face something that would make them wish they had human allies. Part 3. 6 months after the disaster at Titan's Edge, Jake Harrison stood in Earth's new military training facility, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The humiliation of the war games had changed everything. Earth's membership in the Galactic Federation hung by a thread, and most alien species now treated humans like embarrassing children who had wandered into an adult conversation. But something else had changed too. The classified messages Jake had been receiving were no longer just warnings. They were reports of actual destruction on a scale that made the war games look like playground fights. The first system to die was Kepler 442, a mining colony on the edge of known space. The distress signal lasted exactly 14 seconds before cutting off completely. When Federation scouts arrived 3 days later, they found nothing but empty space where 5 planets had once orbited their star. Not destroyed, not broken apart, simply gone as if they had never existed. The second system to vanish was Tau Ceti, home to a major Zerani research station. This time there were survivors, a handful of scientists who had been in deep space when their homeworld disappeared. Their reports made no sense. They spoke of ships that looked like living things, vessels that seemed to grow larger as they fed on energy weapons fired at them. By the time the fourth system went dark, the Galactic Federation was in full panic mode. Emergency sessions were called on Nexus Prime Station. Ancient defense protocols were activated. Battle fleets that hadn't moved in decades were recalled to protect the core worlds. Jake received the full intelligence briefing from Earth Command while standing in the training facility's main hall. Around him, 300 men and women practiced fighting techniques that no alien species would recognize. They were learning to think like humans instead of trying to copy alien tactics. The enemy called itself the Void Collective, though no one knew if that was their real name or just something the universal translators had made up. Their ships looked organic, like enormous sea creatures swimming through space. They absorbed energy attacks and seemed to grow stronger from every battle. Conventional weapons barely scratched them. What made them truly terrifying was their intelligence. The collective didn't just destroy civilizations, they studied them first. They learned each species' strengths and weaknesses, then used that knowledge to become better killers. Reports from the few survivors described collective warriors that combined the best abilities of multiple species. The Zephyrian military, so proud and confident just months ago, suffered their first major defeat in over 1,000 years. General Vexitar's home fleet was completely destroyed trying to defend their industrial world of Zephyr Prime. The planet's 20 billion inhabitants simply vanished along with their world, leaving behind only empty space and radiation. The Cathera hive minds faced an even worse fate. The collective seemed able to corrupt their mental links, turning hive warriors against their own queens. Entire colonies descended into madness as their shared consciousness was twisted into something alien and hostile. Hive mind Zaraketh herself barely escaped when her personal guards tried to kill her after their minds were infected. Jake watched the intelligence report scroll across his display and felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The galaxy's greatest military powers were falling like dominoes. The species that had mocked human weakness were begging for help from anyone who would listen. On Nexus Prime Station, emergency sessions ran day and night. Desperate plans were proposed and discarded. Some wanted to gather all remaining fleets for one massive battle. Others suggested retreating to the core worlds and hoping the collective would be satisfied with the Outer Rim territories. A few even proposed surrender and negotiation. Jake's earpiece buzzed with an incoming call from Earth Command. Admiral Patricia Kane's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "Commander Harrison, we need you back on Nexus Prime immediately. The Galactic Council is requesting human assistance." Jake almost laughed at the irony. 6 months ago, these same aliens had declared humans unfit for real warfare. Now they were desperate enough to ask for help from the species they had humiliated. "What kind of assistance, Admiral?" "Any kind we can provide. They're not picky anymore. The collective just destroyed Cortex Station, the biggest trading hub in the Mid-Rim. 300 million beings died in less than an hour. The aliens are starting to understand that this threat is beyond anything they've faced before. Jake looked around the training facility one more time. The soldiers here were learning something that no other species seemed to understand. They were learning to fight dirty, to ignore conventional tactics, to win through sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up. It was the most human thing imaginable. "I'll need to bring a small team," Jake said, "and I want complete operational freedom. No interference from alien commanders who think they know better." Admiral Kane's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "You'll have it. The Council is too scared to argue about chain of command anymore. They just want results." The journey back to Nexus Prime took Jake through star systems filled with refugees. Cypherian warships that had once seemed invincible now limped between stations, their golden hulls scarred and blackened. Kithara transport vessels carried the few Hive members who had escaped mental corruption, their usual perfect coordination replaced by paranoid isolation. When Jake arrived at the station, he barely recognized it. The gleaming corridors were filled with military personnel from dozens of species, all talking in hushed voices about the latest collective attacks. The confident atmosphere of 6 months ago had been replaced by barely controlled panic. Ambassador Helen Price met him at the docking bay, her face showing the strain of constant crisis management. "They're waiting for you in Conference Room 7, the same room where they challenged us to prove ourselves." Jake nodded and walked through the station's corridors with Lisa Monroe and Alex Carter beside him. Other beings stepped aside as they passed, and Jake caught fragments of whispered conversations. The humans were no longer objects of mockery. They were the unknown quantity that might somehow save the galaxy. Conference Room 7 looked very different than it had 6 months ago. General Vextar sat slumped in his chair, his golden scales dulled with exhaustion and defeat. His homeworld was gone, his fleet destroyed, his pride broken. Hivemind Zaraketh's forearms moved in random patterns, her mental links damaged by the collective's corruption. Representatives from 24 species filled the other seats, but their confident postures had been replaced by desperate hope. These were beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and they were looking to humans for salvation. Jake took his seat at the table and waited for someone to speak. Finally, General Vexitar raised his head and looked directly at him. "Commander Harrison, we need a miracle. The collective is moving toward the core worlds. Our best estimates give us 2 weeks before they reach Earth itself." Jake met the alien general's eyes without flinching. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Something impossible," Hivemind Zaraketh said, her multiple voice now fractured and uncertain. "Something that defies logic and conventional tactics. Something that only humans might be crazy enough to attempt." Jake smiled for the first time in months. "Now you're speaking my language." Part 4. Jake Harrison floated in the cramped cockpit of the stealth ship Shadowrunner, watching a collective fleet consume another star system through his enhanced sensors. The bioadaptive technology grafted to his body made him invisible to their organic detection methods, but it also made him feel like something alien was crawling under his skin. 2 weeks had passed since the desperate meeting on Nexus Prime Station. While the Galactic Council argued about evacuation plans and last stands, Jake had volunteered for a mission that every military expert called suicide. He would infiltrate collective-controlled space alone, gather intelligence, and hopefully find some weakness they could exploit. The ship itself was a masterpiece of human engineering, combined with salvaged alien technology. Its hull was covered with biomimetic plating that made it look like space debris to collective sensors. Its engines ran silent and cold, using gravitational manipulation instead of traditional propulsion. Most importantly, it carried experimental technology reverse-engineered from collective fragments found at destroyed worlds. Jake watched through his sensors as collective ships fed on the dying world below. The vessels looked like enormous sea creatures with translucent skin that pulsed with stolen energy. As they absorbed power from the planet's core, they grew visibly larger, their organic hulls stretching and adapting. It was like watching cancer cells multiply and fast forward. The planet's inhabitants had put up a brave fight. Orbital defense platforms fired streams of energy at the collective ships, but each blast only made the attackers stronger. The defenders' own weapons became food for their enemies. Within hours, the planet's surface began to crack and crumble as its core energy was drained away. Jake activated his ship's recording systems and documented everything. The way collective ships moved in perfect coordination, despite having no visible communication. The way they adapted their tactics in real time as new threats appeared. The way they seemed to learn from every attack and become stronger. But Jake was looking for something else, something the alien military minds had missed. He was looking for the human element that might not exist in a perfect enemy. He was looking for mistakes, inefficiencies, anything that suggested the collective could be beaten. After 3 days of careful observation, Jake detected something unusual. A group of collective ships had broken away from the main fleet and were heading toward a small asteroid field. Their behavior seemed different, less coordinated somehow. Jake decided to follow them. The asteroid field had been a mining operation before the collective arrived. Automated platforms still extracted rare metals from the larger rocks, their robotic systems too simple to interest the enemy. Jake hid his ship among the mining equipment and watched the collective vessels approach. What he saw changed everything he thought he knew about the enemy. The collective ships weren't hunting or feeding. They were experimenting. Jake watched as they captured several mining robots and began dissecting them with delicate energy beams. They were studying the machine's simple programming, trying to understand how such basic systems could continue functioning. Jake realized that the collective's greatest strength was also a potential weakness. They were too perfect, too advanced to understand simple solutions. They could absorb and adapt to any sophisticated attack, but they were confused by crude, straightforward approaches. As Jake watched, one of the mining robots malfunctioned and began attacking the collective ship, examining it. The robot's simple cutting laser couldn't harm the massive vessel, but the collective's response was fascinating. Instead of simply destroying the robot, they spent several minutes analyzing why it had stopped following its programming. Jake moved closer, using the asteroid field for cover. His bio-adaptive systems made him effectively invisible, but he could still observe and record. What he discovered over the next few hours would have seemed impossible to any alien strategist. The collective was studying every species they encountered, adding their biological and technological advantages to their own capabilities. They had the Zephyrians' energy manipulation abilities, the Kithera's hive coordination, the Zerani's matter control, and dozens of other powers stolen from destroyed civilizations. But they had never encountered anything like humans. Jake accessed his ship's database and reviewed what Earth Command knew about human military history. Every other species in the galaxy fought according to logical principles. They used their natural advantages, followed established tactics, and adapted their strategies based on predictable patterns. Even their innovations followed understandable rules. Humans were different. Human military history was filled with victories that made no logical sense. Outnumbered forces defeating superior enemies through tactics that should have failed. Desperate last stands that somehow turned into crushing victories. Strategies that worked precisely because they were too stupid to work. Jake realized that the collective's perfect logic was their blind spot. They could predict and counter any rational strategy, but they couldn't understand irrational human behavior. They had never faced an enemy that won by doing exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right time. As Jake prepared to leave the asteroid field, his sensors detected something that made his heart race. Hidden among the larger asteroids was a prison ship, one of the collective's organic vessels converted to hold captives instead of weapons. Jake could detect life signs inside, survivors from various species that the collective was keeping alive for study. Jake knew he should return to Federation space with his intelligence, but he couldn't leave prisoners behind. It went against everything human in him. He made a decision that any alien commander would have called tactically unsound. Jake approached the prison ship using an attack pattern that violated every rule of stealth warfare. Instead of careful logical movements, he flew in erratic spirals that kept changing direction for no apparent reason. The collective's sensors tracked him, but their targeting systems couldn't predict where he would go next because Jake himself didn't know. He fired his weapons at random intervals, sometimes shooting at empty space, sometimes hitting the prison ship's less vital systems. The collective vessel tried to respond, but its perfect coordination was disrupted by Jake's complete lack of pattern or purpose. Jake managed to breach the prison ship's hull and rescue 23 survivors, including Zephyrian Captain Veltara and Kithera drone Zixhive, who had been isolated from their hive mind. As they escaped in the Shadow Runner, Jake noticed something important in the collective's response. The enemy ships had stopped their systematic search patterns and were moving in confused circles. Jake's illogical attack had introduced chaos into their perfect order, and they couldn't adapt fast enough to compensate. For the first time since the war began, the collective was reacting instead of controlling. Captain Velterra, her golden scales dim with exhaustion, looked at Jake with something approaching awe. "How did you do that?" No logical tactical system could have penetrated their defenses. Jake smiled as he set course for Federation space. "That's exactly why it worked. The collective can handle logic. They can predict rational behavior and counter sophisticated strategies. But they can't understand humans who do the impossible simply because they refuse to accept that it can't be done." Zixhive, speaking without the support of her hive mind for the first time in her life, added her own observation. "You fought like chaos itself. Random, unpredictable, impossible to counter. If there are more humans like you, perhaps this war is not over." Jake looked at the data he had gathered and the survivors he had rescued. The collective was heading for the core worlds, including Earth, but now he knew their weakness. The question was whether he could convince the galaxy's greatest military minds to embrace the magnificent insanity of human warfare. Part 5. Jake Harrison stood in the briefing room aboard the Federation flagship Unity, surrounded by the greatest military minds in the galaxy. Maps showing the collective's advance covered every wall, and the news was worse than anyone had imagined. The enemy would reach the core worlds in less than a week, with Earth directly in their path. Admiral Kane had arrived from Earth with a small fleet of human ships, their crude kinetic weapons looking pathetic next to the energy cannons and matter disruptors of their alien allies. General Vextar commanded what remained of the Zephyrian military, his golden scales now permanently darkened with grief for his lost homeworld. Hivemind Zaraketh spoke for the scattered Cathara survivors, her mental link still damaged from collective corruption. Jake presented his intelligence to the assembled commanders, showing them recordings of collective ships and explaining what he had learned about their weaknesses. The alien officers listened with the desperate attention of beings who had run out of conventional options. "The collective cannot predict illogical behavior," Jake explained, pointing to tactical displays that showed his chaotic rescue mission. "They have perfect coordination, unlimited adaptability, and combined strengths from dozens of species. But they have never faced enemies who win by doing exactly the wrong thing." General Vextar's voice carried the weight of 1,000 defeats. "What are you proposing, Commander? That we abandon all military doctrine and hope chaos will save us?" Jake nodded. "That's exactly what I'm proposing. Every species in this room fights according to logical principles. You use your advantages, follow established tactics, and adapt based on predictable patterns. The collective has learned to counter all of that." Admiral Kane stepped forward, her Earth uniform looking plain among the elaborate alien military dress. "Commander Harrison has developed a battle plan that violates every rule of engagement we know. It should result in complete disaster. That's exactly why it might work." The plan Jake outlined was so insane that several alien commanders physically recoiled from the tactical displays. Instead of organizing a defensive line to protect the core worlds, he wanted to attack the collective's main force directly. Instead of using the Federation's most powerful ships, he wanted to lead the assault with Earth's weakest vessels. Instead of coordinating their attack for maximum efficiency, he wanted each ship to act independently with no overall strategy. Hivemind Zaraketh's fractured voice expressed what everyone was thinking. "This plan has no logical foundation. It ignores basic tactical principles. It uses our weaknesses instead of our strengths. It will result in the death of everyone involved." Jake smiled the same smile he had worn when facing impossible odds his entire career. "You're absolutely right. That's what makes it perfect." The debate continued for hours, but there were no alternatives left. Every conventional strategy had been tried and failed. The collective was 3 days away from Earth, and desperate times called for desperate measures. Finally, General Vextar made the decision that would either save the galaxy or doom it. "We will follow the human plan. May the ancestors forgive us for what we are about to do." 2 days later, Jake found himself aboard the ESS Defiant, the same ship he had commanded during the humiliating defeat at the War Games. But this time was different. This time he wasn't trying to prove that humans could fight like aliens. He was going to show the galaxy what happened when humans fought like humans. The human fleet consisted of 12 ships, all armed with primitive kinetic weapons and crewed by soldiers who had trained for months to think irrationally. Lisa Monroe had developed communication systems that deliberately introduced random delays and errors. Alex Carter had modified their weapons to fire in unpredictable patterns that changed every few seconds. Behind them came the remnants of the Galactic Fleet, damaged Zephyrian warships, scattered Kythera vessels, and ships from a dozen other species that had sworn to follow human leadership into what looked like certain death. The collective fleet appeared on their sensors like a living nightmare. Hundreds of organic ships the size of cities moved through space with perfect coordination. At their center was the Prime Synthesis, a vessel so large it looked like a small moon covered with pulsing veins and glowing organs. Jake gave the order that began the strangest battle in galactic history. All ships attack at will. No formation, no coordination, no plan. Just hit them with everything we have. The human ships scattered in all directions, each captain making independent decisions about targets and tactics. Some ships flew straight at the enemy in suicidal charges. Others retreated at full speed while firing behind them. A few began spinning wildly while shooting in random directions. The collective's response was immediate and catastrophic for their own forces. Their perfect coordination systems tried to track and counter dozens of different attack patterns simultaneously. Ships that had moved in flawless harmony for millions of years began bumping into each other as their navigation systems overloaded. Jake piloted the Defiant through the chaos like a man possessed, dodging energy beams and ramming smaller collective vessels. His crew fired their kinetic weapons at targets that made no tactical sense, hitting random spots on enemy hulls just to see what would happen. The alien ships following the human example began to understand what Jake had been trying to teach them. Captain Veltara abandoned Zephyrian military doctrine and started using her ship's energy weapons to write insults on enemy hulls instead of trying to destroy them. Zixhive convinced her crew to fire all their weapons at once in different directions, creating a spectacular light show that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. The battle became a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Human ships performed impossible maneuvers that should have torn them apart. Alien vessels used their most advanced weapons for completely pointless attacks. The entire fleet fought like a group of drunken pirates rather than professional military forces, and it worked. The collective's perfect logic broke down completely when faced with opponents who had no logic at all. Their ships began firing at empty space, their formation dissolved into confusion, and their hive coordination collapsed under the weight of too many unpredictable variables. Jake fought his way through the chaos toward the Prime Synthesis, the massive command ship that controlled the entire collective network. His ship was damaged, his crew was exhausted, but they had done something impossible. They had confused a perfect enemy into defeating itself. The final confrontation took place in the organic corridors of the Prime Synthesis itself. Jake and a small team breached the ship's hull and fought their way to its center, where the collective's central intelligence waited. The being he found there was pure logic given form, a crystalline entity that could process billions of calculations per second. Jake didn't try to destroy it. Instead, he did something that no logical mind could process. He began telling it stories about human history, showing it examples of humans achieving victory through complete tactical insanity. He showed it the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 soldiers held off an army. He showed it D-Day, where success depended on doing exactly what the enemy expected them not to do. The Central Intelligence tried to process these illogical victories and failed. Its perfect computational matrix couldn't handle the paradox of winning through losing, of strength through weakness, of success through apparent stupidity. The cascade failure that began in its core spread through every collective ship in the galaxy. Jake returned to Earth as the hero who had saved the galaxy by teaching it to embrace beautiful, magnificent chaos. The species that had once mocked human warriors now sent their best students to human military academies, where they struggled to understand concepts like tactical flexibility and creative insubordination. General Vextar, his golden scales bright with renewed hope, formally apologized to humanity and requested to study under human commanders. Hive Mind Zaraketh worked with human psychologists to rebuild her damaged mental links using human techniques for thinking independently. Jake stood in his old training facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching alien cadets try to master the art of fighting without thinking. The galaxy had learned its most important lesson. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from perfection, but from the magnificent unpredictability of beings who refuse to accept that something cannot be done. The human spirit had made the galaxy tremble, and in doing so, had saved it from an enemy that perfection could never defeat.